Continuing education knows that at the end of the day, students want to graduate. And we can help them do that because we really listen to their needs. And we can offer them flexible options, both within continuing education and across the campus.
We don't take a cookie cutter approach. We realize each student comes with their own story. So whether it's a part-time student looking to complete a degree program or someone just looking for online courses, we're there to connect them to the resources of the university.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us at the 78th Annual Conference on World Affairs. My name is Lisa Marshall. I am the Associate Director of Science Storytelling here at CU Boulder. I have the best job on campus because I get to share all the amazing research that we do here with the world. So for recording purposes, today's date is Tuesday, April 14th, 2026. It's 11 a.m., and the name of this panel is Into the Unknown, How Risk, Discovery, and Storytelling Bring Science to Life. Now, before we get started, I would like to read the University of Colorado Boulder's land acknowledgement. The University of Colorado Boulder, Colorado's flagship university, honors and recognizes the many contributions of Indigenous peoples in our state. CU Boulder acknowledges that it is located on the traditional territories and ancestral homelands of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Ute, and other Native American nations. Their forced removal from these territories has caused devastating and lasting impacts. While the University of Colorado Boulder can never undo or rectify the devastation wrought on Indigenous peoples, we commit to improving and enhancing engagement with Indigenous peoples and issues locally and globally. We will do this by recognizing and amplifying the voices of Indigenous CU Boulder students, staff, and faculty and their work, educating, conducting research, supporting student success, and integrating Indigenous knowledge, consulting, engaging, and working collaboratively with tribal nations to enhance our ability to provide access and culturally sensitive support and to recruit, retain, and graduate Native American students in a climate that is inclusive and respectful. Thank you, and welcome again to today's discussion. I just want to briefly ask that all of our attendees remain respectful throughout the discussion and refrain from interruptions. Signs, banners, and noisemakers and other audible disruptions are not permitted and will result in those responsible being asked to leave the room. Time will be allotted for questions at the end of this, and we'll take your questions via handwritten note cards. So raise your hand if you have a question, and a producer will give you a note card and a pencil. And if you're a student, put that on there so we can kind of give you guys preference. And now I'd just like to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about their research, what they do, and why they love science storytelling. I'll start with you, Laura.
Okay, I'm Laura Linenfeld, and I'm a professor of communication and the executive director of the Alan Alda Center for Communicating Science at Stony Brook University. And I have a question for you, and this may reveal something of a generational divide, especially the crew that just walked in. How many of you know who Alan Alda is? Yeah, as predicted, it kind of fell out just that way. So I run the center, and what we do is we go around the country and around the world, and we use improvisational theater and social science-based strategy to help scientists and engineers communicate like human beings and make connections, and storytelling is part of that. So that's me and who I am.
All right, so I'm really excited to be here. I am a scientist trained as a geologist. I'm very interested in how people and Earth's surface interact, going back and forth both directions. And in the last decade, I've really gotten a passion for telling that story outside the classroom and outside of graduate education, but to the general public, because I think understanding the Earth at this moment and understanding our impacts on the Earth and Earth's impact on us is probably the most critical thing we can do. And as scientists, it is incredibly important that we tell our stories outside of academia and outside of scientific meetings. The stories I'll be telling today mostly center around climate change, the Cold War, Greenland, and some fantastical things the US military did. Within a couple years of when I was born, and that was 1961.
I'm Nalini Nadkarni. I'm a professor emerita at the University of Utah. I'm also a National Geographic Explorer at Large, which is a really wonderful thing to be. And I'm a senior fellow at the Sorensen Impact Institute, which is weirdly in the College of Business. I mean, it's weird that I'm in this College of Business. I identify as a scientist, but also a science communicator. I study the biota of forest canopies and the plants and animals and microorganisms that live in the treetops of tropical and temperate rainforests. And in recent years, I've gotten very involved with public engagement, informing and inspiring people to learn more about those creatures and plants, and trying to move beyond the sort of typical places that scientists usually communicate, museums, science museums, botanic gardens, and so forth, taking myself and other scientists into prisons, into corporate boardrooms, into artist venues, and into religious settings to try to spread the word of how important trees and forests are.
So before we start, I think a key to successful storytelling is to know your audience. So I have a question. How many of you are scientists? Great. And how many of you are students of the sciences? How many of you are science curious? Great. Okay, so I'm going to try and make this as interactive as possible, but I do want to start with a question, and I'm going to start with you, Laura. Why is science storytelling important, and especially right now?
How much do I need to say about why it's important right now? I will tell you, at the Alda Center, we've been so busy, and I think what's happened is people are finally recognizing, and I'll be curious to hear what you have to say about this, just how important communication is for science, and that we cannot leave it for granted, and that people need preparation and support and community to tell story well. Story is so important because it binds us. It's the way we actually process information. I hope I'm not taking away too much of what you'll say, but it's how we learn and how we come to get to know each other is through story. So if we just sat here and spewed out some facts, you probably wouldn't remember them, but if we shape them into a story arc that hits you somewhere in the heart, and I like to say we are feeling beings who also happen to think, rather than thinking beings who also happen to feel. If we don't go through the heart, people won't remember. And if they don't remember, you're not going to build that trust and have the connection that we need to help make a difference with and through science.
All right, I'm going to tell a story to answer this because this is about storytelling. And I read the title and it said Human Experience into Understanding. So I want to give you just a short vignette of human experience and how it comes to tell us about the climate. This is relevant because I'm going to talk about ice. And there's two kinds of ice we can talk about, right? The ice that is terrorizing our nation and the ice that is melting in Greenland. One of the reasons we know so much about the ice melting in Greenland is due to one man. His name is Herb Ueda. And if you think about that last name, that might tell you something. Herb Ueda was born well before World War II. He was 13 years old when he and his family were taken to the American version of a concentration camp. He lived in Puyallup, Washington. He was sent to Idaho. He got out of that camp and he went and he enlisted in the Army after getting his university degree in mechanical engineering. And then he worked for the Army Corps of Engineers. And this same man led 6 years of drilling the first ice core that was ever drilled through an ice sheet. And he got to the bottom and he kept drilling and he brought up a couple meters of frozen soil that's been my scientific life for the last 6 years and has shown us just how fragile the Greenland ice sheet is. And I just want to say that because here's a man who, in the face of sort of incredible discrimination, was not only resilient, but was a patriot and went on to work for his country after that. He's a Japanese American. He was an American citizen when this happened to him. So I find this incredible relevance and connection in the story of Herb Ueda.
Great.
Oops. Because of all the social and ecological problems we're facing. But I think it's not because the crisis of sort of trust between science and the public exists, or that the public is ignorant or uninterested or antagonistic to science. I think it's actually the opposite. We know that the Pew Center, for example, documented a few years ago that 3/4 of the American public place scientists among the most trusted professions in our society, and that at least that many also think or have at least some interest in science, and 30 to 40% have stated that they have great interest in science. So I think that this disconnect is really sort of on the part of the scientists themselves, and that's part of the practice and approach that many scientists have, which is that science is the best way or perhaps the only way of knowing, and so very often other ways of knowing and communicating have been sidelined. And secondly, the academic reward system, that I know as a scientist that I'm rewarded for publishing scientific papers that are read mostly by scientists. I give talks in conferences rather than talks outside of conferences and scientific settings. So I think that and there's very few trainings for scientists, and of course the Alan Alda Center and other scientific trainings are incredibly important, but until pretty recently that wasn't the case. I mean, I'm 71 years old, and I know when I started out as an assistant professor at University of California, I had to hide any public engagement. I would not tell my colleagues that I had gone to talk to go, at a Girl Scout meeting, because I would be viewed by somebody who was wasting her time doing such a thing instead of writing a proposal or publishing an article. And over the arc, I think, of the last 40 years, we who are interested in doing this kind of communication have really seen a wonderful sea shift, that many of the younger people coming through now, graduate students, young assistant professors, are saying not just, gee, I'd really like to help with communicating with science, but how can I do this? How can I be more effective? Where can I go? Scientific societies are beginning to offer trainings in their own conferences. So I think we're seeing a different world, not only in terms of the urgency of the need for scientists to do so, but as they say in Costa Rica, a ganas, a desire to do that. And that, I hope and I think, is being met by groups like the Alan Alda Institute that are actually helping scientists to do that work.
So, story brings the science to life. Oh, thank you.
I think it's on. Okay. Oh. Nope.
There we go.
Bright green light.
So
I see it.
as you mentioned, story brings science to life. I want to, you told a wonderful story, so I wanted to, Nalini, give you an opportunity too. Can you tell us a story that maybe brings your research to life? A eureka moment, or a moment you were out in the field that really changed your worldview that you can share?
Sure. It was actually at a professional baseball game. Now, I am not a sports person. I'm the opposite of a sport. I really do not care who won the World Series or not. But this sort of relates to an experience I had in a museum. I was at a museum. There was a docent who was talking, a scientist actually, who was talking about their moth collection. And there was a public audience sort of following him around. And he was talking about the moths that he had collected, and he was opening up drawer after drawer of drab-looking, almost seemingly identical moths, and just going like, aren't these incredible? Now, I have more drawers to show you. And I remember one member of the audience said, why does this matter? And the scientist was puzzled at the puzzlement of the public person, because he couldn't imagine why they wouldn't be interested in these moths as he was. And so, he sort of said, well, isn't it obvious? And of course it wasn't obvious. So anyway, I went to this professional baseball game, and I was bored stiff. And here were all these people surrounding me, cheering and being enthusiastic and spouting out all of these baseball statistics. And I asked, why does this matter? Why does this matter? Why are you so excited? It was exactly the parallel of that public person in the museum. And then somebody else turned to me and said, Well, you know, Nalini, you're crazy about trees. Don't you know that all professional baseball bats are made of wood? Wood? Is it maple? Is it oak? Is it hardwood? Are they made, what kind of wood? And so suddenly I had a thread that connected me to this world of professional sports that I never had before. It was a link between something I cared about, what species of tree are used and why for these bats, to something that I was not connected to before. And so that led me to understand that if I were to try to engage people in what I find important, what matters to me as a tree scientist, I need to find some connection about what they already care about in order to link that to me. And that thing that they care about might seem completely unrelated to the person who's inside that world, like hickory versus maple to a baseball fan. And so that's when I began thinking about ways that I could connect little girls, for example, to Canopy Research. And so I started working with Mattel and National Geographic to create a line of Explorer Barbies, including a treetop Barbie that comes along with a little booklet about canopy plants and animals. And so that sort of connected it. I started working with churches and faith-based groups because 80% of all people on earth self-identify as being religious or believing in God. That's a bigger percentage than those who are environmentalists or care about conservation biology. But instead of using the scientific authorities of scientific papers, which is what I rely on and what I think is the cat's pajamas, I began reading the Bible and the Quran and the Talmud and Buddhist stories to find all the verses that related to trees and forests. And I put together sermons about trees and spirituality that I then began giving from the pulpits and bimas of places of worship, so that there was no conflict between evolution and creation, because I had drawn the text from the Holy Scriptures themselves. And that's resulted in tree plantings and talks at seminaries and so forth between a scientist and religious communities. And so as I started applying that approach of what I now call tapestry thinking, of weaving the threads of other societal sectors into the fabric of a tapestry that includes scientific values, we've been able to create a tapestry of care and concern. And I can even now weave the thread of baseball into that because of that thread of wooden baseball bats. So for me, that was an important moment, just seeing the disconnect between what do I care about, what do scientists care about, and what do people who aren't scientists care about, and to stop making assumptions that what drives us, what we are passionate about, will always drive other people's passions.
Oh, I love that. I had to write down tapestry thinking. That is just, I'm keeping that one. I'll credit it to you, of course.
Great.
But, Laura, tell us a story.
A different kind of story. I've been at the Alan Alda Center 10 years now, and I came out of a faculty position. I was at University of Maine for quite a while. It was a wonderful place to work. And one of the first experiences I had, and Nalini, you and I know each other quite a few years now at this point too, so I loved your story. I loved the tapestry metaphor. When I first came to the center, we went to run this workshop. I won't tell you where because I don't want to name the person, but there was a woman, and we'd done our standard training. Can you imagine we make scientists do improvisational theater? Not stand up, but improv to connect. Everybody gets really scared at first, and then they're like, wow, this is fun. So we were also doing media interviews with this group, and this woman had been in the training. There were about 20 people. She'd been great the whole time, and we put her in front of the camera, and I was going to interview her, and she froze. And I said, what's going on for you? And she said, I had a really bad time. She was a climate scientist, and she had gotten really pulled apart in a media interview. And she said, I don't ever want to do this again. And I said, you have so much to share. Why don't we just try this? This is just between us. It's not going public. And I got her to do this interview. She did great. And I found out later, it raised her confidence so much that she actually started going out and doing media interviews again. We need that confidence. So for the past 10 years, it was March 1st was 10 years in the center, and I had this dream because I really believe, and I'd be curious to hear what the two of you think, I really think the scientific community needs a sense of resilient community in this storytelling. It's very hard. We've done a lot of work training individual scientists on their own, but if you don't have cohorts of people who you can work with and connect with and talk through when it's difficult, it's a lot of burden on an individual. So I was very fortunate. Stony Brook University is part of the State University of New York system, SUNY. And we were able to start this Leadership Academy. It's a full-year program, 4 in-person meetings. And we had faculty from across the State University of New York system. And now they're this cohort of friends. They can call each other up. And I'm seeing them build that confidence we saw in that woman systemically over time.
So we've talked a lot about the importance of science storytelling, so I want to kind of get back to the specific stories that you all have been telling. Paul has an amazing book, When the Ice is Gone, What a Greenland Ice Core Reveals About Earth's Tumultuous History and Perilous Future. This seems like a subject that may seem a little intangible or obscure to someone who lives in the mountains of Colorado or on the coast of New York. So not to sound, I'm going to just be very devil's advocate. Why should we care? And how do you write and communicate your science in a way that makes people understand that they should care?
Figure out which way to start that answer.
Okay.
Better?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
That led me to an ice core that had been collected in 1966, and that was Uwita's story. It had disappeared. We got a piece of it at the University of Vermont, 2 pieces of it. We formed an international team, and a big surprise came out of that. And it's the only eureka moment of my scientific life. When we took that core apart, we melted it, we sieved it to get the different grain sizes apart, and then we were washing it and saving all the wash water because there was so little. You could hold this thing in your hand, and the core itself was rarer than moon rocks. And there were these little things floating in a bin of water. And I'd had long ago in my past had done a lot of coring of lakes. And if we wanted to get things out of those lake cores to understand how old they were, we would look for these little fossils that would float. And I looked at the guy next to me and I said, "Those are plant fossils." And he looked at me and let out a string of expletives I will not repeat today about how crazy I was. They turned out to be plant fossils, and that changed my scientific life because it meant that the ice sheet had disappeared in northwestern Greenland because you can't grow plants under ice, right? But it changed my life in a much deeper way than that one scientific finding, because after we published the first paper, I got a phone call from an editor at W.W. Norton who said, "This would be a great story for the public. Write a trade book." And my response directly was, "What the hell is a trade book," right? I've never written anything like that. I write papers like you're talking about. I lecture. I do all the academic things. I write textbooks. And she said, "Don't worry, we'll hold your hand through this. We'll help you learn how to write a different genre." And she did. And that was 2021. And I've not been the same person since. Because writing the book taught me how to take the science that I would talk to graduate students about and I would talk to colleagues about. And having 2 amazing editors taught me the translation to how to address the public. That then morphed under the current administration is I need to communicate what I know as an expert that's evidence-based and fact-based and get my feet wet with writing opinion pieces and stating the fact as a scientist that I have an opinion. And that is really rare. That's not how I was trained. I was not trained to advocate, but now I'm an advocate. So that's my story of how we got here.
So I want to circle. you. I want to circle back to Laura in a minute and kind of revisit this theme that I keep hearing, that scientists are, for some reason, reluctant to share their stories, especially their personal stories. I find that in my job a lot, interviewing scientists. But I wanted to ask Nalini, you do your science in a really interesting place. I wonder if you could talk just a little bit about what it's like to be up there in the treetops, and just how what you're finding there is important for us all to know about.
Sure. So I'm very fortunate to work in the forest canopy of two major study sites. One is in Washington State, the temperate rainforest of the Olympic National Park. And the one I've spent most time in is in Monteverde, Costa Rica. How many people have been to Costa Rica or Monteverde? Great. So those who have been there know the incredible richness of life, the diversity of species, the amazing stature and interconnectedness of that forest. And that's only when you walk on the forest floor. But when you get into your harness and go up into the canopy 100 feet above the forest floor, you're in a completely different world with a different microclimate. It's much more sunny, there's more wind, there are greater extremes of relative humidity, and the architecture of the canopy is completely different than what you see on the forest floor. Essentially, if you're a plant, your substrate are these suspended cylinders in 3 dimensions. And so there's this amazing diversity of plants that have adapted to life in the forest canopy, over 28,000 species of vascular plants. And in a place like Monteverde, this cloud forest, they just cover every square centimeter of branch and trunk. And those are the plants that I've been studying. They previously were sort of discounted as being ecologically unimportant, but it turns out, as we have found out, that they're very important in terms of nutrient and water cycles. These canopy plants have no roots that go into the trunk or the branches of trees, nor to the forest floor, so they get their nutrients from outside the ecosystem in the form of rain and mist and fog that comes into them. And that also makes them not only fascinating, but also vulnerable to climate change. So as we're getting longer dry seasons and less mist and fog because of rising sea and land surface temperatures, those canopy plants are undergoing decline, and it's predicted they might disappear by the year 2030. So some of my studies and my student studies have been about the effects of disturbance, of climate change, and also physical disturbance on these canopy communities. And we did back in 1987, before most of you were even born yet, we cleared branches of their canopy-dwelling plants, and we decided to look at how fast they regenerate, how fast they return. And because these cloud forests are so lush in the canopy, we expected that they would return very quickly. Well, we came back the first year, nothing was growing back on those branches. Second year, third year, bare as a baby's behind. It wasn't until 13 years that we began to see mosses growing on the underside of the more moisture parts of the branch that over the next 20 years accumulated and grew and covered the whole branch. And now, even 40 years later, what we're seeing is that the plants that grew back are not the same plant communities, not the same species that have grown back. It's another sort of set of species that have colonized those bare surfaces. So to answer your question, Lisa, about communicating this, of course, we've written papers about this, about how these plants, although they look robust and lush, are actually quite fragile, not very resilient at all, and that they don't come back after disturbance. So one of the public groups and audiences that I've been cultivating, working on in terms of science communication, have been people who are incarcerated in state prisons and county jails and juvenile detention centers, people who live and work in the most nature deficit environment really in our country, who don't have access to nature or science education. And we started with a science lecture series that then moved into this wonderful set of programs where we bring conservationists to train the inmates to raise endangered and rare plants and animals that are then released into protected areas. And that has been very successful. I'll just tell you a little tiny story about one of the inmates who was working with the mosses that we brought in. One of our projects was to learn how to grow mosses for the horticulture trade to avoid removing them from wild old-growth forests. And I talked to them about the biology of mosses, that they can dry down and then get regenerated as soon as water hits them. So he asked me, hey, Professor, could I take some of this moss back to my cell? And I said, well, if it's okay with the officers, it's okay with me. Sure, we got plenty. And I said, why do you want that? And he said, well, you told me that they dry down. And they can last for a long time when they're dried down, but then when you put a little water, they'll regrow. And he said, that's what I need to be reminded of. And so Leo, who was in prison for 7 years, was using the metaphor, I guess I would say, of a living moss to help him through his time of disturbance. And what we were able to then tell him was that when we described our disturbance experiments where it took a long time for these mosses to come back, they did come back, but there was a different composition. There was a transformation that had happened in nature, in the canopy, and that perhaps he would have this opportunity as well to transform himself into whatever third state he might move into. Not the original state, not the recently disturbed state like those stripped branches, but some new state, some third state in which he will flourish. And so to me, that was just an incredible lesson, not only in terms of the receptivity of people who you might think, prisoners, inmates, people who are serving time for having committed crimes, a group of people that we often discount and we shove away and we keep hidden in our society, keep them away from science education, away from nature, the people who might need it most, but also that someone in that population would have an insight that would be helpful for me to better understand the power of nature in the human sphere.
It's that tapestry thinking again. He was doing it for himself.
Exactly.
Which is really beautiful. So I just wanted to ask one more question, and then I wanted to see if you guys have any questions for one another. But Laura, you interact with scientists all the time. I know you guys have done some surveys. Why is it so hard for scientists to feel comfortable talking about this stuff?
There's the green light. So first of all, I want to dispel the myth that scientists are not good communicators. Scientists are actually great communicators. I think what happens is we get some of the experience drilled out of us. How many in this room took comps or did a dissertation defense? Okay. There's a very particular way, and a lot of hands went up, there's a very particular way in which we're taught to communicate in academia, and it's actually kind of defensive. That doesn't really work well with all audiences. So I think what's happened is we've become really good at talking to certain audiences in certain ways, and we are cursed by our knowledge. Our knowledge is a great thing. It's what we do at universities, we create knowledge, but when we're cursed by it, we forget what it's like not to know what we know. And it makes it hard for us to communicate with people in ways that land with them. And I loved hearing both of your stories. Really, you're both very empathic, you're very focused. This is exactly what we teach people to do. Who's your audience? What do they care about? How do you make meaning together with them rather than, we use this image of a spray can, spraying information out. Alan Alda calls that excommunication because it's just going randomly and landing on people rather than connecting with them. So I think we need training. I think it should be built into graduate education. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. But I think it's really important that if you have opportunities like the work you do or the work the two of you both do and represent, it's so powerful to see those role models of people who have communicated with different public audiences. There's no one public, by the way. If that were the case, everybody would have voted the same way in the last election. There's very divided publics. And you have to understand who these audiences are. And I think that can be frightening because you may be afraid of how that's going to come back at you. So one other thing I'll just say quickly is we wrote a textbook. It's the first ever open access science communication textbook. It's available for free. We had some wonderful philanthropic support from Rita Allen Foundation, Kavli Foundation, and Brinson Foundation to make this available. You can go online. You can access it. It's called Science Communication for Scientists. 4 colleagues and I co-wrote it. And what we wanted to do was give people the tools in the classroom to use or to learn on your own if you don't have that access. And there's a lot of cool exercises in there that you can do yourself as well.
Could I say something to that also? Yes. I think you're right, Laura, that scientists can be excellent communicators because of their passion and because of their knowledge. But I think there's a missing piece that we often find in scientists, and that is they are unwilling and sometimes unable to bring their own personhood into conversations, into presentations, because we are taught to be objective. And if we're not objective, you look at scientific communication, it's all in the third person. It's all written in very, very sort of removed language in order to assure the reader and other scientists that we are being objective, which is a primary piece of what it means to be a scientist. And so when we move, though, from the university setting, from the scientific conference into the realm of the public, one of the things that we can draw upon are our personal characteristics. And I've developed a training that sort of takes some of what Alan Alda has done so well, but taking it a little bit in another direction. It's called the STEM Ambassador Program, also funded by the National Science Foundation. And in it, we say to researchers who are in our trainings, you can not only draw upon your research topic, you can draw on who you are as a person. So if you have, like myself, have Indian parentage, I know how to talk to Indian people because I grew up that way. So there are many groups that are, of Indian parent, and they're interested in people from India and how they came to India and so forth. So I've given talks to groups from India here in the United States about my research, but also what it was like for my dad to come over in 1946 when there were hardly any Indian people. Another person in our program is a cook. She is a microbiologist, but she also loves fermentation cooking. So we arranged for her to join a cooking class that was given by a local grocery store, to join in a class of fermentation cooking about how to make kimchi and kombucha and so forth. And she brought in a microscope with the microorganisms that are responsible for that fermentation. And the people in the cooking class were desperately interested in that because it related to what they were already interested, which is fermentation cooking. We had a graduate student in wildlife biology who's also a hunter. So he went to a rifle range and gave a talk during a normal hunter education class about the ecology of climate change and how it affects elk habitat and so forth. So we really had to explicitly say to these scientists that it is okay. It's okay. It's not going to hurt your reputation to reveal that you're a single mom, or that you have a mother with Alzheimer's disease, or that you're a skier, or any of these things that we normally as scientists keep in the background. We can bring those to the forefront as a means, as an approach, as a tactic, and as a strategy to connect as humans to the people that we're engaging with.
Yeah, Paul, I was going to say, I'm in.
All right, so those were great, and I want to try to touch on both of the statements. First is the audience that you're not used to and the different audience, and I think the second is the personal piece. So one of the things I learned after the book came out and I started doing interviews and I was doing some talks and those sorts of things that I hadn't realized was the power of the military's involvement. So the military drilled this first ice core, and if you ask most people who does climate change, you're never going to hear the word military. And it took me probably a year and a half to realize that it may be the best catalyst that I know to sort of breach this partisan divide that we've created in this country over climate change. The military is not typically red or blue. It spans the entirety of the American experience, right? And it is one of the things that is still valued, if you look at surveys in this country, by the majority of Americans, where most other institutions are not. So I've written a short piece on this that probably, I think, if I look back at the impact I've had as a person, and I don't come from a military family. My dad was drafted right at the end of World War II, and that was it. I know a few veterans, but not many. I wouldn't call myself pro-military by any means, probably exactly the opposite. And so I befuddle many of my more liberal friends when I say the military cared about climate change in the 40s and 50s because the climate was warming, especially in the Arctic. We can use that as a way to talk between partisan factions. And it means that I can sit down with someone with very different politics than I have, and we can have a conversation that involves climate change without anything defensive. And it has been nothing short of a miracle catalyst for me to say, guess what? The Army drilled the first ice core. It's how we know about climate change over the last 100,000 years. And they cared then and they care now, even if they can't use those words. Mm-hmm. So instead, they're using the words resilience, right? Mm-hmm. But as a science communicator, it's been one of the most powerful things, and it's a new audience, and I injected my personality into it. So I think these are really powerful statements you both made.
So I'm getting a ton of questions from the audience. Before I start looking at these, and there's some really great ones, I just wanted to ask, do you all have any questions for each other?
I'm good from hearing from these folks.
Okay, and thanks for all the questions. I think that I'm seeing some common themes, and one of them I would say is, we used, when kind of global warming first came on the scene, people used art and emotion to sort of get people to connect to it. What is the next strategy to get people to care about or be invested in what's happening now with climate change, especially in these tense times when there's so much political and social backlash? I guess, what comes next? That worked then. What do we need to do now? And really, any of you can jump in.
I'll quickly jump on that one. I don't think it actually worked. I think we're in the position we are now because we posed climate change as this existential ethical crisis, and what we got was a pushback. So I think moving forward, the way to deal with climate change and to cool this divide is to make it personal. And it picks up on what you're saying. How has climate change affected every person in the room, right? Not the Al Gore inconvenient truth, and this probably does another age divide here, right? How many people have seen the inconvenient truth? How many young people here have seen the inconvenient truth? Yeah, exactly. Under 20. Good. The Inconvenient Truth was a doom, death, and destruction kind of movie. The end of the world is coming. The end of the world is still coming if we continue down this path in many ways, right? But it didn't help the problem. And that the first panel I was in was talking about the fact that all these climate interventions we've done in the last 20 years, all the Paris Accords, all this, have really not switched how our climate trajectory is going. So we got to do something different. My experience is we talk to each other about what happened every day. Why have there been 200-year floods 2 years in a row in Vermont? I can talk to Vermonters about that, right? Because their homes have been swept away, the bridges are out. In Colorado, why did you have the driest driest winter in centuries perhaps here? There's no snow. We drove over the mountains yesterday. I'm like, where is the snow in Colorado? It's April. So make it personal, and I think we can make more advances.
Yeah, can I jump in on that? Oh, did you want to say something? Okay, great. I think that's perfect. I think that's absolutely perfect about making this personal. But I've also done some math. There are 350 million people in our country. There are about 6.2 million scientists. So if each scientist talks to just 52 people a year, that's one person a week, we will have spoken to every single person in our country. And so what we need is one more thing than what you talked about, which is we need a little bit of an introduction so that we can have conversations with people and not just immediately say, hey, what about that drought or what about that flood in Texas? So I think there are techniques that we can use to bring on those conversations. Like, for instance, even though I really do not get why people paint their fingernails, every 3 or 4 weeks or so, I'll go into a manicurist station and I'll have them paint trees on my fingernails in bright red nail polish. And so that gives me the opportunity when I'm hanging out with some young women who all have their fingernails painted to start talking about our fingernails, but then bring up topics like, this has been, the last 2 years have been the 2 driest years in human recorded history. When you get on an airplane, you can do what I do, which is I open my laptop, I pull up some pictures of really beautiful trees, and I turn my laptop slightly to the right. And suddenly, I have this fabulous conversation with the person next to me about Costa Rica or sometimes climate change or biodiversity loss. And so it's that one-on-one that happens as we invite people to have conversations with us as people while still transmitting scientifically sound information and listening to what their information is about climate change, about floods, and so forth, that allows us on a very small level, one person a week at a time. Your barista, talk about shade-grown coffee. Your Uber driver, talk about electric vehicles. Those are the kinds of things, I think, Lisa, that might make a shift in the way that not to say policymaking is useless. We absolutely need that top down as well. But this is a way that scientists like me and Paul and Laura can do, the scientists that Laura trains, in order to kind of make it personal, make it widespread, and have a larger impact.
I love that you mentioned that about turning your laptop, because I think there are a lot of scientists who, too, I've interviewed scientists who say, we're really busy, especially the female scientists with children that I interview. They're like, we want to be communicators, but we don't really have time. It's like one more thing for us to do.
Right.
So little things like that are really, I think, what great advice. Laura, what do you have to say about this?
I want to add a different angle to this. And by the way, I come from Long Island. If you don't get your nails done, something is wrong with you. So it's just a thing. I want to add the element of strategy to this. And I was thinking about this question. I think in the scientific community, we're a little uncomfortable with the idea of strategy. Maybe it feels like it's manipulation. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about getting clear about what we want people to do. What is the behavior we want people to engage in? Learning is one thing, being able to actually activate that knowledge and do something with it. And I think there's a lot of research out there on different audiences. And one of the things we do, we have workshops specifically focused on climate, is help people identify who is it that I'm communicating with? What's their starting point? There's this wonderful work from Yale, The Six Americas. You know this, right? There's a really broad spectrum of belief and values when it comes to climate. Where do you start? Where are you hoping this conversation will lead? What are the actions you hope this person will take? I'd really like to see us scale that up so that we are moving forward somewhat on the same page, as much as you could do that together collaboratively. And helping, it's not just raise awareness, it's the ability to take action.
So I have a question for our producers. Are we done at 12:10 or 12? 12:10. Okay, great. Okay, so I have a question from the audience for you. What is a specific improv exercise you use to help scientists communicate their research?
We use a lot of them. I'm going to describe one for you, but then maybe we can do one. What do you think? Could we do one? So I'm going to describe one. All right, I knew you were going to like that. And it actually builds on what you were describing before, Nalini. It's as if you invented the exercise. We play this game, and these are very thoughtfully scaffolded. We don't just start with this. We get people comfortable and teach them to connect. I'm going to teach you a connection exercise in a moment. But we have one called hobby speed dating. And imagine a room of 20 scientists, and 10 are sitting in the middle, and they're looking out, and 10 are sitting around and across from each other. And we say, I see my friend Carol Brew over here. Carol, tell me a hobby that you love. Weaving. Oh, look, we've used that already. And then I would be the scientist, and I'd have a minute to connect my work to weaving. And then you move on. And it's the goal of this exercise is to generate ideas so you can connect around something someone else cares about. It doesn't always work, but it gets your energy flowing. So I'm just going to try one with you. This is a silent exercise. All right, you ready? Somebody caught it.
Still going. It's in the back row.
It changed shape and, wow, that was a good catch. You want to toss it back here? All right, thank you. We were tossing an imaginary ball around the room. Why would that be important? What does it take to be successful? It's all body language. Eye contact, really making sure that person knows, feeling the idea of the ball, knowing when it comes at you, you can catch the ball I threw. It's amazing. Look at that improv. How much of communication is about our ability to read eye contact and body language? And half the time, we don't even notice what someone is wearing or what their eye color is. Communication's about listening. It's about hearing deeply and then being responsive and generating care for those with whom you want to connect. It's not about spraying information, it's about connecting. Thank you for that. Y'all are good.
So I have another question. I'm getting a lot of these. One of them's from a student. I'll read them both. How do you deal with science skeptics? What is the best way to convey info to people who distrust science as a whole? And the other one says, I have MAGA Republican parents who do not believe in science, who do not believe in scientists and credible sources. How do you balance becoming more personable while still remaining credible? Really good questions. I'm sure you guys have run up against it.
I think when you approach someone who states, I don't believe in science or I don't believe what you do, I try to, again, sort of flip it and say, how do I feel when an evangelist, and I'm not religious, although I have a weird religious background. My dad was a Hindu, my mother was an Orthodox Jew, so I sort of came to this conclusion that pretty much all religions are the same, but they're not something I particularly believe in. And so when I think about an evangelist on the street coming up to me and saying, hey, here's a Bible and you need to believe in Jesus or you're not going to be saved and you're going to go to hell. And my response is like, oh, I don't want to be in this space. That's someone's attacking the way I think or don't believe. So I try to put myself in that mindset. And the way that I guess I've come to deal with that is to try to find, and I think we've all been talking about this, which is to try to find something kind of sideways that you do agree with and start with that. And so you were talking about the military. For many people, although some liberal people might say, ugh, the military, I can't stand the waste of money of the Department of Defense. Many people, almost everybody knows somebody in the military who has served in the military. And there's some connection, some positive connection to that. So if you start talking about, my father-in-law, for example, was in the Navy in the South Pacific in World War II. I could start talking about the military and military spending in the context of that connection, that human connection, that positive connection. And once you start having a conversation with someone, whether it's the person at the hotel check-in place or the person who's serving you coffee at your diner day restaurant, or whether it's, John Bolton, who talked to us last night about, his conservative politics, I think if we can start at a point where we can agree, we can start inching toward conversations that might be more difficult. And to me, that is one tactic that we can take in terms of resolving what seem like intractable differences between the way we think or our values. Because I've also come to understand that it's very, very difficult to change beliefs and passions and values. No one's going to make me a Christ believer, I don't think, no matter how many Bibles they offer me. But we can agree that trees are beautiful and wonderful because there are 328 references to the word tree and forest in the Old Testament. And on the first page of Genesis, the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil are celebrated as being very important trees. So whether trees got to this earth by evolution or God creating them, I don't have to come to agreement on that with a religious person, but we can agree that trees are important to both of us.
Paul, or do you want to chime in briefly on that? We don't have a ton of time, and I've got a couple other questions, but I want to hear from you.
I'm just going to say patience. It takes a long time to develop that kind of relationship, and I'll give a very short story, I promise. I was interviewing a veteran who'd been at Camp Century when he was 21 years old, and he invited me to his home in Georgia, and I went. He put me up for the night, he fed me, he introduced me to his whole family. And when I left 36 hours later, after noticing the Trump 2020 and Trump 2024 signs on the walls of this place and meeting his entire family, he gave me a hug and he looked at me and he said, I know our politics disagree. I know you're a Northerner and I'm a Southerner, but you're family now. And it took that amount of time. And we still disagreed on things, right? We disagreed about climate change, but we agreed that Greenland was important. He had spent 3 months of his life up there. And that was our connection. And we still have that connection. We email, we text, we are still connected with a man, 20 some years older than I am, and very different life experiences from a very different state. So it's not gonna happen in a 30-second exchange. It's gonna take concentrated effort. But I feel like I made a friend and things changed.
Mm-hmm.
This is a very specific, very sciencey question, but as long as we've got y'all here, we might as well take advantage of it. How does the panel address Colorado's epic current drought as completely unusual when the Dust Bowl, which included part of Colorado, was in the 1930s, less than 100 years ago? Science proves climate rhymes, if not repeats. Paul, you want to take that one?
Can you read the last piece of that again?
It says science proves climate rhymes, if not repeats.
Okay. So I am not the best equipped, but I see people in the room who could probably answer this better about the hydrology of Colorado. So I'm going to give a broad piece, and then if you want some audience comment on this specific drought, I suspect there's several folks who could give that in here. Climate always changes. I'm a climate scientist, and I will tell you that climate always changes. There is one huge difference right now, and that is the rate of change, right? So for billions of years, Earth's climate has changed. Over the last 2.5 million years, we've gone in and out of ice ages, warm periods, cold periods, warm periods, cold periods, rhythmically. Again, the difference is the rate. What we are doing right now is warming this planet faster than it almost ever has before. And that's due to the fact we're running one giant atmospheric experiment right now by changing the composition of our atmosphere and changing land use and how the land behaves, and that's changing the way carbon moves around the Earth. So when talking to people, that the climate always changes is a very common response of climate denialism. And my response to that has been, I completely agree with you, it changes. Keep coming back to the rate of change and why it's happening.
Okay, I have two more questions. And this one is really just it's probably a good one for you, but any of you, as an elementary educator, I would love to see more curriculum that would help to connect kids to science in a way that makes them care about it. Do you have any suggestions? Just wondering if you all have any suggestions there.
Yeah, elementary school kids are probably the most important audience that we can think of because they're going to be the next generation. One of the things I've been working on most recently is an initiative that I call the Our Trees Initiative with National Geographic. And the idea is that, and it's a storytelling initiative, actually, so I think it belongs here. So the idea is sort of to treat, the initiative is like a tree. We gather stories from scientists, from artists, from indigenous people, from faith-based groups, and from personal stories of trees. I think everybody has a tree story. So we take these into our resource hub, our database, and then we shape and curate those stories and try to think of appropriate actions people take on behalf of trees for particular public groups. One of those groups actually is second graders. We have what we call a node curator, a second grade teacher herself, who's trying to take these stories and this information to make actions for her second grade class and perhaps for other second grade class. So she started a group called the Tree Guardians, and her second graders walk out for recess with little vests and little buttons that say Tree Guardians, and they tell all the kids on the playground about the importance of the trees that are in their schoolyards. And they've also now we're developing information for school administrators to encourage the planting of trees in schoolyards, materials for parents of those second graders. And we're also now taking those materials to give to people who are incarcerated to provide those for the families of incarcerated people. That is, their kids who come and visit during visiting hours to provide the information about the importance of trees to those kids. So I think that it's really possible to develop materials that are sort of both inside classrooms but also semi-outside classrooms, like this Tree Guardians group. And it just takes some creative thinking, some dedication on the part of this single school teacher, Jenny Wormuth, who took it on herself to say, I want to do something about trees for my kids. So I think when we start thinking of, and again, this goes to, I think, Laura's really excellent point about knowing your audience, that the public is not one big public, that it's segmented, and we have to target materials specifically for that audience, but we need people who are knowledgeable about that audience in order to do it. Because I don't know how to talk to a group of second graders. My kids are 34 and 36 years old. I've completely forgotten how how to talk to second graders, but Jenny knows how. So by connecting the science and the scientists to the second grade person or node connector, to the kids, the parents, the facilitators, the administrators, we have a chain, we have a thread, a connector that again is weaving these public groups into a tapestry of care and concern.
I'll just say this quickly, and whoever asked the question, I'm happy to follow up with you after. There are some really great web-based materials, podcasts, shows, videos, and also a lot of informal science learning centers, zoos, museums. They have really fabulous materials online. But like Nalini said, like this is a particular expertise, and depending on the age group, the content is going to be really different.
So these are tough times for science due to proposed funding cuts. We're worried about drought and fire and natural disasters, and there's a lot of bleak news in the world. But I really want to ask you guys, what gives you hope? And maybe, Paul, let's start with you.
Oh, a couple things give me hope. I would say my students give me the most hope. I work with a group of really bright graduate students. I'm actually teaching a science communication class right now, and their dedication to getting the word out about, and this is across a wide range of disciplines related to the environment, but their enthusiasm about getting out the research they're doing, their passion for it, the opinion pieces they've written, the personal reflections they've written, to see that that we're training now a generation of students to think across science disciplines and to proudly talk about it. My proudest moment was actually last Thursday. We went to the public radio station in our town in Vermont, and the 10 students came with me, and the noontime person did mock interviews with them in the studio with the on-air sign flashing and all this thing. We'd practiced at the university before, and they'd written about their own work. But to watch them in a 3 to 4 minute interview confidently explain the intricacies of the science they'd done, from forestry to geology to environmental justice, and I just sat back and said, I have hope, because these folks know how to communicate. Their advisors are supporting them. I was supporting them as their faculty. Their students around them, they were all supporting each other. We have to educate differently too. And I think we're starting to see that and bring it to fruition. About climate, hey, it's cheaper to generate power with solar energy now than it is with fossil fuels. That gives me hope. Yeah. We need to figure out the societal will to move that forward, but I think there's hope.
There was an organization called Science Counts that did some work a number of years ago. And when I say the word brand, like the brand of Harley-Davidson isn't motorcycle, it's freedom. It's the feeling that this product creates in people. So the work that he did determined that not for everybody, but vastly across the US, the brand of science is hope. And I think we need to know that when we're communicating, not that we promise a payoff for every single thing we do. We need blue sky science, we need basic research, but people are looking for answers, and I think that's a really compelling thing. I also just love that you're teaching science communication. I think people are craving it. I think they want to get out there and make a difference. So we're here to help however we can.
I think what gives me hope is watching those branches get recolonized after 40 years. And the fact that that trauma, that disturbance that they experienced, that we imposed, of stripping off all of those canopy plants and the canopy soils, and even though the return was slow, they did come back. And what really gives me hope is that they came back in this new way, this new combination, this novel, never seen before composition and structure of those communities. And I sometimes think about the disturbances that we're encountering now with climate change, with social injustice, with political divisiveness, that we feel like has never been this bad before. And I can get full of despair, just as when I kept looking at those branches and like nothing's coming back after year 7, 10, 12. But the fact that those epiphytes grew, those canopy plants grew back, to this third state, to this different state, sometimes inspires me, I think. And when I think about Alan Alda and all of the scientists that it's trained in, when I think about, a book like this written by a scientist that's now available probably in airport bookstores and so forth, then I feel like we may be moving into a third state that we couldn't even ever have imagined, and that might never have occurred without the disturbance. And so I don't want to be a Pollyanna and to say these times when I read the New York Times every morning and go like, oh my God, what's happening next, are good things, but they are a disturbance that can result in a third state that is neither the original state, neither the recently disturbed state, but some new configuration that has been precipitated by a disturbance that will allow us to occupy and be in our planet and with nature, in new and unexpected and possibly positive ways.
Wow, what an awesome way to end this. That's so great. This has just been so amazing, and I just want to thank all of you for being here, and I want to thank the audience for being so attentive. While I have your attention, I just wanted to make a plug for the Mountain Research Station. Has a summer lecture series if you're local. It's June to August, every Wednesday up at the Mountain Research Station up by Rainbow Lakes. Absolutely beautiful place up there. Check it out. And if you want to learn more about what's happening here at CU Boulder and the amazing science that we're doing, we have a monthly science newsletter on LinkedIn. It's called Beyond, which is, I named it because I think that's kind of what science is all about, getting us beyond where we are now in a good way. So check it out. Comes out once a month, and it's a showcase of some of the science storytelling on our own campus. And that's it, and thank you.
Good job.
Mic's on.
Pardon me?
I see your mic's on.
Oh, yes, that's true.